Hello everyone, welcome back. We're going to continue our look into what we've deemed psychology of the criminally insane. And so far, everything that we've looked at has been kind of a one-off, a single solitary event in someone's life where they ended up killing somebody, whether they planned it or not. So we saw justified homicide, premeditated murder, impulse crimes. Today, we're going to look at the ones that took it a little bit further than that. The first thing we're going to look at are our spree killers. These are people that go for a length of time and commit multiple different murders in that amount of time. And it could be over several days, several weeks, several months. And the next one we're going to look at are mass murderers. Now, the definition of this causes a lot of argument, especially over people that want one side or the other for gun control. So some of them say that 3 or more people being shot at is a mass murder, or 4 people being killed is a mass murder. But today, it's not going to be any argument that the person we're going to look at is definitely a mass murderer. Multiple victims on the same day is what our definition will be. And this is killing by the numbers, where body count is what's going to determine how horrific their crime is. So, let's get started. Now, the first case I want to look at is John Muhammad and his adolescent partner Lee Boyd Malvo. They are who are known as the DC snipers or the beltway snipers. They were across the country and then eventually in Washington, DC in 2002. And what's really intriguing about this case is the amount of planning and grooming and just malice aforethought that went into this. All of the events leading up to it are quite the climactic build-up. So let's dig a little deeper. First, we're going to take a look at John Muhammad. He's much older than his counterpart, his accomplice in this crime. He was born December 31st, 1960 in New Orleans, Louisiana. He was born John Williams. He converted to Islam in the late 80s, 1987, and changed his last name, his surname, to Muhammad to pay homage to his newfound religious beliefs. His mom passed away when he was a young kid, and he felt that he was bullied as he was growing up. He felt unrecognized and unappreciated for his talents. He was a little bit antisocial. He joined the army. He joined the National Guard and then transferred into the regular army. He became a highly trained marksman. He was really good with a rifle and earned awards for it. He ended up being deployed into the Gulf War and is a veteran of that war. He came back, and that's when he converted to Islam. He married Mildred, his wife, in 1988, and they had 3 children. Now, a key part of the case is his friend and fellow guardsman that testified against him and eventually turned him in. And he said he was a good family man. He was, strict, but he wasn't abusive. He didn't have any sort of domestic violence tendencies or anything. He's just a good neighbor, a good coworker, and a good family man. There's belief that he developed PTSD from being in the Gulf War. His friends and his wife both reported that he was changed somehow when he came back, that he started to grow this bitter resentment towards the United States, towards his country, and towards his wife. He started to argue with her, eventually threatened to kill her on a few occasions, which started to cause strife in their relationship. As the relationship of John and Mildred becomes more volatile, they end up at a point where it's just not going to work. They can't reconcile, and the marriage eventually dissolves into divorce. Now, John, at one point, decides he's going to kidnap the children, take off with them, and go and hide out in the Caribbean. And while he's down there, he starts a black market business. And what he's doing is creating forged documentation for immigrants that are trying to get into the United States, whether it's social security cards, birth certificates, passports, whatever. He's trying to make some documentation so that they can get across the border, and then while they're there, avoid detection. And he's charging a really good price for this. So while he's down there, the children are eventually located by detectives in the United States. U.S. officials come down, bring the children back, and they end up in family court. While they're in family court, John tries to say his piece, tries to tell his side of the story, but he's completely disregarded and ignored by the judge. And he's confused by this, and he's distraught, just completely decimated emotionally by this. And the children are taken completely away from him, and he is harboring a resentment for that. So the judge gives full custody over to Mildred, and once she has that, she can do whatever she pleases, and she just takes off. She's afraid. She disappears, doesn't tell him where she's going, takes the children with him, and is just gone. Okay, so let's take a look at the accomplice, the young man, the teenager, the juvenile, the adolescent, Lee Boyd Malvo. He's born in 1985 in Jamaica, which is going to put him at 17 years old when he's going up for trial for the murders that were committed. His dad left when he was 5 years old, so he was pretty much raised by a single mom until he had met Muhammad. His mom was very strict to the point of abuse, where she would beat him if he didn't obey her the way that she had wanted him to. She was looking for work all of the time, and he was kind of a burden to her, so he had to endure a lot of periods of abandonment where she was just gone, doing whatever work it was that she had to be doing at the time. There were teachers, pastors, a lot of the friends. They all said that he was desperately seeking a father figure, any type of male that was in his life, whether it's a teacher or anybody in authority that was a man, he would cling on to, trying to fulfill that father relationship that he needed. He really enjoys drawing. He's talented at it. There's going to be a lot of that comes into play during the crimes and then afterward while he's in prison. And that's how he expresses his emotion. That's how he just expresses himself. His mom desperately wants to get out of Jamaica, wants to immigrate to the United States, and that is how she comes into contact with John Muhammad. Malvo's apprenticeship to Muhammad was based on the movie The Matrix, in his mind at least. He felt he was the character Neo. And this all started when his mom was willing to abandon him again, just leave and take off to the United States with her paperwork. So he is there with John Muhammad, and Muhammad takes him and begins to groom him. While he's grooming him, they begin to train religiously. He gets him into school, but then after school every day, they go to the gun range and they practice shooting rifles, and he becomes a marksman to the point where John is saying that he's even a better shot than he ever was. They go on rigorous exercise routines, specialized diets so they could go long periods of time of fasting and not eating. And of course, the Islamic religion was a deep part of the training and apprenticeship that Malvo was going through. And a huge part of this that John wanted to implement was violent video games and violent movies. This was with the goal of desensitizing Malvo to any type of violent acts or violent behavior. After all of this grooming had been going on for a while, it's time for Muhammad to send Malvo on his first mission. And he knows where there's a friend of his ex-wife that had been, well, in his mind, messing with him and making him really angry. So he sends Malvo over to kill her. Well, they didn't know that her niece was there at the house, and Malvo knocked on the door. She opens the door, and he shoots her in the face. Her name was Kenna Cook, not the intended target. He shot her in the face. It's his first kill. It actually makes him sick, but now the apprenticeship is complete. As they began their spree, they took off across the United States. They were headed towards Washington, D.C. because John's friend had said that that's where his ex-wife was with the children, and he's harboring that resentment. There wasn't enough proof to pin that on him that that's the reason why they did it, but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing towards that, and there's a lot of trauma that goes into divorce and custody cases that could cause somebody to snap. And so as they're beginning this spree, they get an old police car and they customize it for what they're going to do. They cut the firewall out of the back between the seat and the trunk, so you could lift the seats up and the shooter could crawl from inside the car into the trunk without ever getting out of the car. They also cut out notches in the lid to the trunk so that they could put the barrel of the rifle through so that they could do spotting and they could see out without having to lift the lid of the trunk up or have to get out of the car at all, to be as incognito as possible while pulling off these acts. Now, over 3 weeks, they shot a total of 23 people, and they killed 15 of them. These people were at Home Depot, they were pumping gas, they're just random people standing around, and all of a sudden, a sniper takes them out. They were usually anywhere from 80 to 90, sometimes more yards away. They were a football field away from these people. They had no idea that they were around, and nobody could tell where it was coming from. That's how they could get away with it for so long. Until they robbed a liquor store, and when they did, they dropped a magazine and left some prints for the police to find. Now, Malvo has a criminal record. He'd been arrested before for illegal immigration. His prints were compiled in the INS database, and he was the one that robbed the liquor store. It was his prints on the magazine they found, so they were able to identify him through that. And they knew that he had been hanging out with John Muhammad. So they're closing in on him. The snipers had left notes and drawings for police to find, kind of a calling card. They were flirting with getting caught. They felt that they were smarter and better than the police and that they couldn't catch them. And they were demanding a ransom as well. They had a monetary goal. They wanted $10 million to stop the chaos that they were spreading. Because you can imagine, people were terrified just randomly throughout the city. people were dropping dead. There's no racial motivation, there's no gender motivation. It's just random targets standing at a gas pump or at a Home Depot, wherever, just being taken out by a sniper. So they don't want to go outside. They don't want to be in the open. They're quarantining themselves. Now, their old friend that had said that John was not an abusive person, that he was a good father, that he was in the reserves with him, figured out that it was these two that were doing this, and he called the police and gave them a tip. And after the police got that tip, they found out the license number of the car through the registration, and they put out a public service announcement to try to locate this car. And within 15 minutes, a trucker found the car and called the police. They were asleep at a rest stop, and police were able to apprehend them there. They found the car with the hole in it and all of the stuff done to the trunk. They found the rifle and both men sleeping in it. Now, Muhammad, even though they could not prove that he had pulled the trigger or he had shot anybody or that he had murdered anyone, was held responsible because of his deep psychological role in these crimes, and he was given the death penalty. He was executed in 2009 by lethal injection. Malvo was a juvenile during the course of these crimes in the trial. He was given life without parole, even though he's the one that murdered everybody. Now, our next case is about a guy that opened fire on a crowd of 22,000 people at a country music festival. He used an automatic rifle from the elevated position of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. He was on the 32nd floor, firing down on the crowd. Stephen Paddock put a mind-boggling amount of preparation and planning and sneaky procedures into the worst mass shooting in the United States history done by an individual. Over a period of 6 days, he manages to bring 21 suitcases into his room on the 32nd floor, and he ends up renting another suite next to it, adjoining rooms, a few days after he checked in. But he didn't raise any suspicion because he's a regular there. He's a VIP. He spends a lot of money, and the hotel staff's job is to be nice to people. It's not to be suspicious of them or to confront them. You want to make them feel like they're welcome, make them feel at home. You don't want to make them angry. They'll go to another hotel. So he completely avoided suspicion. But in these suitcases, he is able to smuggle into his room 24 weapons. They're AR-15s, they're AR-10s, there's a pistol. He has over 5,000 rounds of ammunition in his room. Along with that, he has high-capacity magazines that'll hold over 100 rounds of ammunition, and bump stocks, which is a device that you put on the back of a rifle, and it makes the rifle recoil, make it rock back and forth so that the trigger keeps on depressing, turning it into an automatic type of weapon. At one point, he wired over $100,000 to his girlfriends in the Philippines, who he had sent there, telling her to go and buy a house with the money that he's sending. And then within 10 minutes after he started shooting, he killed 58 people and injured 850 more. They were transporting these people just in trucks or in cars of people that were there, trying to get them out of there any way that they could. Ambulances can't get in. You can imagine the chaos that was going on. People were getting injured by the stampede that happened of people trying to run away. There's nowhere to go. You can lay on the ground, but you're not hiding behind anything. And he eventually shoots himself. The extraordinary amount of planning that Stephen Paddock went through included a note of handwritten calculations concerning where he needed to aim to maximize his accuracy and effectiveness to get the kill numbers up. The note contained precise details describing the actual distance to the target, his own elevation, and the bullet trajectory relative to the line of fire. Now, after he killed himself and they found his car, he had elements to make explosive devices in his car, like ammonium nitrate and some other things. It was parked in the hotel's parking lot. He also had another 1,600 rounds of ammunition and a few more guns. Now, one has to speculate, but he may have been planning to make booby traps for the room because he didn't think he was going to live through it, or to make some other type of explosive devices that he could put into the crowd somehow. Witness reports said that Paddock was starting to smell of alcohol early in the morning and most of the time when they saw him, and he could have been struggling with an alcohol addiction. And we know that he had a prescription for Valium that a psychiatrist had given him. And when you combine the two of them, it exacerbates the effect of them, making it a lot stronger, making it so you can't control the effects of either one of them. The casino reports that he lost a significant amount of money gambling, and this is a lot of money. So this is kind of showing an addictive type of personality, maybe some depression and despair, loss of caring about anything, willing to throw it away before something happens. Investigators speculate that he may have had bipolar disorder. He had been under the care of a psychiatrist, and they were going to try to get him on antidepressants, but he refused. He didn't like the drugs. He would rather have the anti-anxiety medication. After his death and after investigating the crime, criminal psychologists have indicated possible characteristics of alexithymia, which is kind of a detachment from emotion. You can't identify and put into words what your emotions are or express them, and you can't really identify other people's emotions. You don't have those social cues, and it leads to a lack of empathy. And eventually, no motive has ever been attributed to this massacre. We don't know why he did this. He didn't leave any real clues as to the ultimate reasoning for doing this, or political motivation, or really anything. It's most people that are in these types of situations that do something this grandiose leave something in order for us to extrapolate on. Stephen Paddock really didn't. This is a mystery that will be debated throughout history. Well, everyone, there's our spree killers, the multiple killers over an extended period of time that are just habitually repeating, murdering people, not really with any type of serial signature to it like our serial killers that we're going to talk about later, and our mass murderers. The definition, like I said in the beginning, is cause for a lot of argument. Mr. Paddock is definitely in the category of being a mass murderer. What do you guys think the psychological aspects behind why they did this? This is the huge question that we have, is if life is so bad, why are you going to inflict this much chaos and harm on innocent people? The why question we will never know, and unfortunately most people that are perpetrators of these crimes, they die while they are doing them because of police action or self-inflicted wounds. So until next time, when we start to investigate our serial killers and other crimes